Hello, today you will hear a story with an interesting plot. It was a very rainy day in May. Richard sat by the window and watched the raindrops trickling down the glass. He loved rainy weather very much. Richard was playing with his favorite Rubik's Cube. Once upon a time, he used to take first place in competitions for solving Rubik's Cube puzzles. "Dear, lunch is ready. Will you join us?" asked Richard's mother, Adeline. "Mom, I'm not hungry. I'm broken and empty, but not hungry," Richard replied. "Well, stop being upset, Richard. The doctor said you have every chance to live a full life again," reassured his mother. "Stop trying to comfort me. Can't you see what's wrong with me? I'm a disabled person. Unable to do anything," Richard responded angrily. Richard was a wheelchair-bound invalid. One accident had disrupted his life. Once he was returning home from work in his car, but failed to make a turn and overturned. They found him the next day in a terrible condition, and he spent a month in a coma. However, he was miraculously saved, but his wife left him and he could not walk anymore. Since then, he spent most of his time at home, rarely going outside and not talking to anyone. He felt like a burden to his family and friends, rarely leaving his room, but he still had one reason to live: his hobby and work. He loved programming. Richard worked tirelessly day and night. He earned decent money from his work, but it barely made up for the fact that he couldn't function as a full human being. His mother and father were very worried about him, as he was their only and beloved son. Occasionally, they took him out for a walk, but he didn't like people seeing his weakness. Richard's mother was so worried about her son that she hired a good psychologist for him. Richard didn't agree to talk to him for a long time, as he believed that only very weak people went to a psychologist, but his mother insisted on it. Richard's doctor was a young graduate student from City University, a good professional named Alice. "Do you think all women are mercenary and don't want new relationships?" Alice asked Richard during one of their sessions. "Yes, I had it all until I became disabled. Look at me, Alice. I'm a helpless creature who can't even take care of himself. I'm not needed by anyone except my parents. I plan to end my life," Richard replied. "But you're not hopelessly ill. You have a chance for recovery and a normal human life," Alice responded. "The chance is very small. I tried to meet girls on a dating site, but as soon as they found out that I couldn't walk, they disappeared. If no one agrees to see me this month, I don't know what I'll do. This month I will commit suicide. I guarantee it to you." Alice felt very sorry for Richard. He was pleasant to talk to, and generally a good and talented person. Therefore, she agreed to become his girlfriend, although his disability embarrassed her. They talked for a long time at his home on various topics. Richard was glad that he had a girlfriend, and Alice was very interested in him. It seemed that she had fallen in love with him. At the same time, Richard went to therapy with his doctor, who promised Richard that he would definitely walk again, but did not specify the time it would take. According to Richard, it was a miracle. All this time, Alice took care of Richard, and his parents provided for both of them. A year passed in their relationship, and Richard valued Alice very much because she was the only one who agreed to be by his side. He had planned to end his life by suicide if everything continued as it was, but Alice saved him from a terrible fate, and for that, Richard valued her greatly. Over time, Richard began to feel his legs gradually and soon made his first steps, which was truly a miracle. "I told you everything would work out. Look at you, you did it. Now you can walk," Alice said to Richard one day. "Yes, you were right. Thank you for all the support you gave me during this difficult time. I really appreciate it, and I will never forget it," Richard replied. When Richard recovered, he continued to earn a living by programming, while Alice provided psychological counseling in a new office she rented. They usually didn't need anything. Richard loved Alice very much and was jealous of everyone, constantly spying on her and checking her phone. Alice tried not to pay too much attention to it, but she wasn't particularly faithful to her chosen one. One day, Richard found a strange conversation in her phone. Alice was texting with a man very passionately and affectionately, and arranged to meet with him. When the day of the meeting came, Alice began to get ready to go somewhere. "Where are you going, my dear?" Richard asked her. "I'm going to the university." This week, there's a very interesting psychologist giving lectures there. It will help me in my professional activity, Alice replied. Okay, I'll wait for you at home, Richard replied calmly, as if it was hard for him to speak without any emotion. Alice left the house and headed towards the university, and Richard, of course, followed her. They met in the neighboring area at Richard's favorite cafe. Richard decided to call his good friend whom Alice didn't know. Hello, Nathan, Richard greeted. Hi, Richard. Long time no talk. How are you? Nathan asked. Not great, but maybe you can help me out a bit. My wife is... Richard requested, can you go over there and listen to what they're talking about? Nathan agreed, no problem, my friend. What's the address? Nathan arrived and sat at a nearby table with Alice and her companion. An hour passed, then 2, and they still didn't leave. But then the door of the cafe opened. Alice and the man came out, he kissed her hand, and they parted ways to their own cars. Nathan followed them. Richard impatiently asked, so, what were they talking about? Nathan replied with sadness in his voice. Listen, they were just having a pleasant conversation about various things the whole time. I think she's cheating on you, my friend. Richard exclaimed, that bitch! Nathan asked, what are you gonna do now, Richard? Richard answered, I'll give her some time. She hasn't done anything terrible yet, but I'm afraid it's all heading that way. At home, Alice acted as if nothing had happened, and Richard pretended not to know anything. Everything seemed normal, but Richard felt uneasy about what he had learned about his beloved. Richard continued to check the messages on his phone, and after 3 days of intense flirting, a certain Anthony invited Alice over to his house, giving his address. They talked as if they were old acquaintances, casually and relaxed. On that day, Alice dressed very attractively and provocatively, wearing a short skirt and a sheer blouse with a deep neckline. Richard pretended to be asleep when Alice left the house. He followed her for half an hour until he finally found himself in the elite district of their big city. She got out of the car and went into the entrance. Richard decided to wait a little, understanding that she didn't go there just for tea. He was clearly nervous, not wanting to believe that his beloved was cheating on him. Half an hour passed since he arrived, and Richard decided to go up to the apartment. He thought enough time had passed for them to have intimate communication. He climbed the stairs step by step, and finally arrived at the door of the apartment that Anthony had specified in their correspondence. The door was open. He quietly walked into the apartment, which was large and had expensive renovations. He walked into the hallway and heard moans coming from one of the doors. Of course, those moans belonged to Alice and Anthony, and Richard had no doubt about that. He opened the door a little and saw a scene on the big bed. Alice was lying on her back, and that scoundrel Anthony was jumping on top of her. They both moaned like wild animals. Yes, yes, punish me. Do it faster, Alice screamed. Richard confidently walked into the room, grabbed Anthony by the neck, and threw him to the floor. Then he attacked Alice and started to strangle her. No, stop, help! Alice screamed with a hoarse voice. Anthony got up from the floor and pushed Richard aside. Richard punched Anthony in the face with all his might, knocking out one of his teeth. Richard left the apartment in complete confusion. He didn't know what to do next. Thoughts were spinning in his head. The person who once supported him in a very difficult moment turned out to be the ultimate traitor. Richard just drove around the city for about 3 hours. He didn't want to go home, as everything there reminded him of Alice. He decided to stop by a strip club and spent almost all of his money there. He wanted to forget. The next morning, he still needed to go somewhere, so he went to his friend Philip. So, tell me, what happened to you? Why did you come to me drunk and tired early in the morning? Asked Philip. I saw a horrible scene. Alice cheated on me with someone else, answered Richard in despair. This is terrible, Richard. You have to get revenge on her. Tao, I have no idea what I could do to her that would make up for all the emotional pain she's caused me. Richard burst into tears. Well, for starters, throw all of her things out the window. She won't be able to sue you for the apartment because it's not in your name. It's in your parents'. Philip suggested. Yes, that's a good idea. What next? Richard asked. She's a psychologist, right? Philip inquired. Yes, she is, Richard replied. She must have a list of clients. You could send them all a message saying that she no longer works as a psychologist and not to contact her anymore, Philip proposed. Yes, she does have a client base, Richard confirmed. And then just delete the client list, Philip added. Yes, I'll do that, Richard said. He said goodbye to his friend and immediately went home. When Richard arrived, Alice was not there. He gathered all her clothes and shoes and threw them out the window as advised by his friend. Then he went into Alice's bedroom and took her laptop, which she used for work, and found a filed client database. There were quite a few email addresses in there, and he sent a message to each one saying, "Hello, this is Alice, the psychologist. I want to let you know that I am discontinuing my practice as a psychologist. I will no longer be conducting sessions. Thank you for your cooperation. Goodbye." And since Richard was knowledgeable about computers, he hacked into all of Alice's accounts and changed the passwords, and some he deleted, so that she couldn't access any of them. Alice lost all of her clients. Then he called a locksmith who changed the door lock, and when Alice tried to open the door, she couldn't. She started ringing the doorbell. "Open up, I at least need to get my things," Alice pleaded at the door. "All your things are already on the street. Get out, you dirty slut. I don't want to see you." Alice went downstairs, picked up her things, and never appeared in Richard's life again. A little later, he found out that she stopped practicing her profession because no one came to her anymore. She got a job as a cleaner, lived in a rented apartment on a pittance, and never started a new family. Richard, on the other hand, came to his senses, met a new girl, his future wife, and they had a wonderful child. They lived in a big, beautiful house and never knew need. Their child grew up happy and healthy. Richard lived a long life with his wife, and they helped each other through everything and always supported each other. They had children first, then grandchildren, and even lived to see great-grandchildren. Richard hardly ever thought of Alice and how she had treated him. Alice remained a serious lesson in Richard's life, one that he just had to live through, and one that made Richard a strong and wise man. Dear listeners, your support is very important to us. If you like our story, please like, comment, and subscribe. It's very important to us. If you like our story, please like, comment, and subscribe. It's very motivating for us. We need your feedback to improve our content.